One of the most interesting people that I've met in the last few years is a guy from London called Christopher Green. And Christopher Green is essentially a composer. He writes songs. He's a bit like a sort of David Bowie type character. He had a project where he wrote a song every Friday for a year and put it out live. He's a very creative individual. And a few years back, he had a bird phobia. And in desperation, he listened to a Hypnosis CD, and it got rid of his bird phobia. He's slightly obsessive, so he then got into hypnosis and learned hypnotherapy and became a stage hypnotist. And at the same time, he was given the sort of accolade, I guess, but the opportunity to be artist in residence at the British Library. It was the first time they'd ever given that role to someone. So if you don't know the British Library, it's a huge library next to King's Cross St Pancras in London with pretty much every book that's been printed since the beginning of the printing press and tons of newspaper archives and obviously digital archives. And they just said, make up a project and use the archive. So being a composer, he went in search of the singing hypnotist. You know, with a few hundred years of mesmerism and hypnotism, thought there must have been someone who sung people into trance. And he dug deep into the archives and failed to find the singing hypnotist. So he ended up creating they just wasn't there. So he ended up creating a show called The Singing Hypnotist. And I've since worked on him creating a song that does that job, and audience members go into hypnosis and all sorts of strange things happen. And it's brilliant. If you get a chance to see it, you should see it. As he was searching for this singing hypnotist, he uncovered a whole bunch of characters that have really been lost to the history of hypnosis. People you are not going to read about in the history books. Not Mesmer, not Braid, but in some cases just kind of workers, you know, who are up and down the country doing an act akin to modern stage hypnosis. And one of these was a lady from the Midlands in the UK, look at that, it's working, called Annie de Montfort. I've never used this in a presentation before. So if it goes astray, I'll just give up on that and look at you. But this lady is a fascinating character, and it's a mystery to me why she was lost. So from about sort of late 50s into the late 1860s we're talking, she was up and down the country. She's featured in tons of newspaper archives. She's featured in the performance journal at the time called The Era. And her mind governed the world. She was the wonder of the age. And this word, psychological, was a very new, exotic word to most people in the West at the time. And she was really introducing people via her act to the idea that your mind is a powerful thing. And she was a kind of stout woman, but you can see from the images here some classic motifs of hypnosis. There's the bridge, not that I'm suggesting anyone does that. She would have men on stage. It's kind of a cross between a stage hypnosis act and the Georgia Magnet act. You couldn't push her over, you couldn't remove her cane, things would float around and all that kind of stuff. So a powerful character. This is another one of her posters from a show in Barnstable. Again, Annie de Montfort. Mysteries of mesmerism and mesmeric seances. I mean, just that phrase itself is enough to kind of get me going. But again, if you look at the images here, you'll see men sort of wielding feather dusters. There's the hypnotized band. There's the bridge again. Again, I really have never got to the bottom of this tightrope walk, but I'm guessing she kind of mesmerized someone to walk across a dangerous cavern. Now, Annie was married to her childhood sweetheart, George de Montfort, and he was like a political agitator. He was a Chartist at the time, and he was a believer. He was into the spiritualism movement. She, on the other hand, considered herself a skeptic. She was a scientist, what that meant at the time, that she was into phrenology and electrobiology, as well as, it's kind of the outgrowth of mesmerism. In fact, mesmerism suffered damage. Braid coined the term hypnotism, or at least he borrowed the term from a Frenchman and coined it himself in 1842. So by the time she was around, mesmerism was a little bit of a dirty word in the scientific community. They were looking for another explanation of the phenomena. But the phenomenon itself didn't go away. People still turned up to see mesmeric acts. Chris dug out her birth certificate, and on the birth certificate, it just says death by, I think it says not unusual injury, but cause of injury unknown. So we started to dig into this. And it's quite a grisly story that I'm going to tell you here. Her husband, George, believed we could make contact with the other side. He had a belief that all spirits, if you like, were available at all times, if we could just reach out to them. He'd sit with a pendulum and he'd say, "Is anybody there? If you're listening, give me a sign. Move this pendulum, move my hand, make my fingers twitch." He continued to do this, and again, Annie, being a skeptic, I guess kept her distance. One night, George was found dead, laying on the floor in a pool of his own blood, his pendulum next to him. Nothing had been stolen, nothing had been disturbed. All that was missing was his right hand. Now, whether it had been cut off or chewed off, nobody ever knew. It was a pretty grisly scene. And these two were childhood sweethearts. So Annie, in her desperation to get to the bottom of this, took George's pendulum, and night after night after night would sit and call out, "George, George, George de Montfort, give me a sign." And would attempt to interpret these movements in that way. And I'm afraid to tell you that there was a blood-curdling scream. And Annie de Montfort was found in exactly the same condition. Dead. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, just her right hand. So today, I was about to say tonight, this morning, we are going to try and contact Annie de Montfort. I'll say that again. We are going to make contact with Annie de Montfort. So, what I'd like you to do is place your feet on the floor. I promise you I am not going to hypnotize you. I am not going to come out into the audience, grab hold of your hand and pull you up here. We are going to do this as a collective. If you are not happy to do it, then cover your ears. I don't know, you can closing your eyes, it's not going to help you, let's face it. So what I'd like you to do, everyone, raise your right hand in the air, so your hand's just slightly higher than your head. And repeat after me, "I am willing to have this experience." One more time. I'm willing to have this experience.